An old black man walked into a bank with nothing but a dusty brown sack. The staff laughed, the customers mocked him, and even the manager told him to leave. But when he opened that sack, the truth inside silenced the entire room and left everyone regretting their words forever. The old man with the sack. "Stop right there, old man. This isn't a charity house. It's a bank." The young security guard's voice echoed sharply through the high-ceilinged hall of the city's grandest bank. Polished marble floors gleamed beneath golden chandeliers, and behind the tall counters, clerks in crisp uniforms busily handled stacks of money. Everyone turned at once to see who had caused the disturbance. Through the shining glass doors shuffled an elderly black man. His beard was streaked with gray, his back slightly hunched, and over his shoulder hung a worn-out brown sack that seemed older than the man himself. His clothes were simple, faded from years of use, and his dusty shoes whispered of long journeys on foot. To most of the wealthy customers and staff, he looked out of place, like a farmer who had lost his way into a palace. A ripple of whispers spread across the room. Some smirked, others chuckled, and one young woman leaned toward her friend and murmured, "What's he doing here? He must be lost." The bank manager, a tall man with slicked back hair and a proud suit, stepped forward with irritation flashing in his eyes. He hated interruptions, especially from people who didn't fit the image of his institution. "Sir," the manager said coldly, "you can't beg here. If you need assistance, there are shelters for that. But this bank is not one of them." The old man did not flinch. His eyes, though weary, carried a calm fire that silenced the whispers for just a moment. Slowly, he turned his gaze around the grand lobby, as if he were taking in a place that already belonged to him. And then, in a steady, deliberate voice, he spoke words that made the entire bank freeze. "I'm not here to beg. I am here because this bank belongs to me." The silence that followed lasted only a second, before the entire room erupted in laughter. Customers chuckled loudly, shaking their heads. A young clerk behind the counter covered her mouth to hide her giggle. Even the guard snorted, leaning on his baton as though the claim had been the funniest thing he'd heard in weeks. "Belongs to him?" one man whispered mockingly. "He probably doesn't even have a penny in that sack." The manager smirked, adjusting his tie as if enjoying the spectacle. "Sir, let me make something clear," he said with slow, cutting words. "This bank is worth millions. Millions. And you expect us to believe it belongs to you?" The old man said nothing at first. He only looked at the manager, then at the mocking faces around him. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips, not of amusement, but of quiet confidence. He shifted the weight of the sack on his shoulder, gripping it tightly, as though the secret it carried was far more valuable than anything in the bank's vaults. "I see," the old man finally said, his voice steady, "that none of you believe me. You laugh because you look only at the surface, my clothes, my age, my sack. But inside this sack lies the truth. And when you see it, your laughter will turn to silence." The laughter slowly died down. Curiosity began to creep into the mocking eyes. What could this frail man possibly have in that sack? And so, with deliberate slowness, the old man began to untie the knot on the worn strap. The sack rustled softly, as if guarding the treasure within. The crowd leaned forward, half in disbelief, half in anticipation. They thought they had seen a poor beggar walk in. But in just a moment, they were about to find out how wrong they truly were. The manager folded his arms, smirking as the old man laid the bundle on the polished marble counter. The sack slumped against his leg, but the papers he produced looked far too carefully kept to belong to someone they all assumed was a beggar. "Go on," the manager said mockingly. "Let's see this great fairy tale of yours." The clerk, a young woman with sharp glasses and a sharper tongue, gave a little laugh and tugged at the string binding the papers. She clearly expected to find worthless scraps, maybe old letters or meaningless notes. But as soon as she unfolded the first page, her eyes locked on the bold heading at the top, Certificate of Ownership, and her smirk drained from her face. Her hands trembled. She blinked rapidly, reading the names, the signatures, and the official seals stamped in red ink. For a moment, she forgot the crowd around her, forgot the laughter, and forgot her own arrogance. This can't be right, she whispered. The manager frowned, snatching the paper from her hands. Give me that. He skimmed the page, then the next, then the next. With every passing second, the color drained from his face. These weren't scraps. They were legal documents, deeds, stock certificates, partnership agreements, each one bearing the old man's name, Henry Jenkins. The bank manager's hands shook as he flipped through them. And no, these are shares, major shares. His voice cracked, suddenly stripped of confidence. The crowd leaned closer, their mocking smiles replaced with confusion. One customer muttered, "Wait, is this real?" Another whispered, "It can't be. He looks too poor." But the manager couldn't deny what he saw. He turned to his staff, thrusting the papers at them. "Verify these." Now, two senior clerks rushed forward, their eyes widening as they examined the documents. One of them gasped, "Sir, these are authentic. Every seal, every signature, it all checks out." The room went silent. The old man, Henry Jenkins, finally spoke, his voice calm, yet commanding. "Years ago, when this bank was nothing more than an idea, I invested every penny I had. I worked through blood and sweat to save enough to buy into it. I trusted men in suits like you to run it while I left to build a life elsewhere. I may not wear fancy clothes, but the truth is simple. I own more of this bank than anyone in this room." The guard who had threatened to throw him out stepped back, ashamed. Customers shifted uncomfortably, remembering their cruel laughter. The clerk who had smirked now looked down at the counter, unable to meet his eyes. Mr. Jenkins placed a firm hand on the pile of documents. "You mock me for the sack on my shoulder, but what it carried was worth more than all the money in this vault. You judged me by appearance, and in doing so, you revealed your own poverty of character." No one dared to laugh now. The room, once filled with ridicule, was heavy with silence and regret. And for the first time that day, everyone in that bank realized the truth. The man they had dismissed as a beggar was, in fact, their boss. The clerk's face drained of color, her voice trembling as she whispered, and Mr. Jenkins, sir, these papers are—" Before she could finish, the manager yanked the documents from her hands. His sharp eyes darted across the pages, scanning the names, signatures, and seals. But with every line he read, his confidence crumbled. His lips parted, and for the first time that morning, no smug words came out. These weren't scraps. They weren't old receipts or junk papers. They were deeds, stock certificates, and ownership contracts, all bearing one name, Henry Jenkins. The crowd gasped as the truth rippled across the room. This man, who looked like nothing more than a poor wanderer with a sack, owned nearly 60% of the bank. The lobby, which had been alive with cruel laughter moments earlier, now sank into stunned silence. The air grew heavy, and every mocking word that had been thrown at the old man now echoed back in shame. The security guard shifted uncomfortably, lowering his eyes to the polished floor. Customers who had laughed and sneered now stared at their shoes, their cheeks flushed with regret. The tellers who had giggled behind their counters suddenly busied themselves with papers, desperate to avoid his gaze. The manager's voice broke the silence, though it shook with disbelief. This can't be real," he stammered. His hands, which had once gestured with authority, now trembled as he waved over two senior staff members. "Verify them," he barked, though his tone lacked its earlier arrogance. The clerks rushed forward, each taking a stack of papers. They examined the seals, ran their fingers across the signatures, and double-checked the bank's records. Minutes felt like hours as everyone in the room held their breath. Finally, one clerk looked up, his face pale. "Sir, it's true. Every document is authentic. Henry Jenkins is the majority shareholder of this bank." Gasps spread through the crowd like wildfire. The manager's knees nearly buckled beneath him. He had just insulted, ridiculed, and laughed at the very man who had more power in this building than anyone else, including himself. And then the old man spoke. His voice was calm, but it carried a weight that silenced every corner of the room. "I built this bank," Henry Jenkins said slowly, his eyes sweeping across the faces that had mocked him. When many of you weren't even born, I was working sunup to sundown, saving every dollar I could. My hands bled from labor, my back bent under weight most of you would never carry. And every penny I earned, I put into this bank. The room was still. His words cut deeper than any shout could have. I trusted men in fine suits to manage it, he continued, his voice firm. I left this city to build a future for my family, believing my investment was in safe hands. And now, years later, I return. I expected respect. Instead, he paused, his gaze locking onto the manager. I was mocked in my own house. The words landed like stones in the silence. Everyone felt the sting, not just the manager, but every person who had laughed, every customer who had sneered, every clerk who had smirked. Henry Jenkins stood tall, his sack by his side, but now no one saw it as shabby. They saw it as the vessel that had carried their shame, and as proof of power. The bank manager's forehead glistened with sweat. His pride, his arrogance, and his cold superiority, all of it had vanished. He took a shaky step forward, his voice breaking apart like fragile glass. And Mr. Jenkins, I didn't know. Please forgive us. We thought. But Henry Jenkins cut him off, his eyes piercing through the man's excuses like a blade. You thought an old black man with a sack could never own something so grand, he said, his words sharp and steady. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. The manager's lips quivered, but he had no defense. Around the room, customers shifted uncomfortably in their polished shoes. The same mouths that had laughed minutes earlier now wished desperately they could swallow their own words. Clerks fidgeted behind their counters, their once smug expressions gone. Shame clung to them like a shadow. Nobody dared to look Mr. Jenkins in the eye, for fear of seeing their reflection in his calm but unshakable gaze. Mr. Jenkins let the silence linger. He wanted them to feel it, the weight of their judgment, the sting of their prejudice. Only then did he speak again, his voice low but resonant. All my life, he began, people like you measured worth by what you could see, by clothes, by age, by color, or by how heavy a man's wallet looked. But real wealth is not always worn on the outside. Sometimes he tapped the sack at his feet. Sometimes it's carried quietly, patiently, until the day the truth is revealed. The words sank into every heart in the room. The guard, the very man who had barked at him first, took a hesitant step forward. His head bowed, his voice soft and remorseful. I'm sorry, sir. I was wrong. The old man looked at him, and for a long moment said nothing. His silence was more powerful than any scolding could have been. He simply gave a slow nod, as if to say the lesson had already been taught. The entire room seemed frozen in that moment, frozen between guilt and awe. Customers who had sneered now wished they could vanish into the marble floor. Staff members who had smirked wished they could rewind time and greet him with respect. But it was too late. The damage was done. The lesson had been delivered. Mr. Jenkins finally straightened his back, his presence commanding though his clothes remained plain. Let this be remembered, he said. Respect is not a gift you give only to those who look wealthy. It is the right of every person who walks through these doors. His voice carried across the hall, echoing against the marble walls and into the hearts of everyone listening. The bank that once laughed at him would never forget him, not as the poor old man with a sack, but as the true owner, the man whose quiet strength had silenced them all. And from that day forward, nobody in that building judged a man by his shoes, his sack, or his skin ever again. From that day forward, the story of the old man with the sack became more than just a memory inside those marble walls. It became a legend whispered through every hallway, passed down to every new employee, and retold by customers who had witnessed it. Henry Jenkins hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't needed to. With quiet dignity, he had walked into a room full of doubters and left it filled with respect. He didn't come to humiliate them, though he easily could have. He didn't demand anyone be punished, though many deserved it. He came only to reclaim what was rightfully his and to remind people that power doesn't always wear a polished suit or drive up in a shiny car. Within weeks, The arrogant manager who had mocked him was quietly removed from his position. The bank's board could not allow someone with such poor judgment to continue leading. In his place came a new leader, someone who understood that customers weren't to be judged by appearance but treated with dignity, whether they wore dusty shoes or diamond rings. New policies were rolled out across the branch. No customer would ever again be laughed at or dismissed based on how they looked. Every person who walked through those doors would be treated with respect, whether they came with a sack or a suitcase. But the true impact wasn't in the policies. It was in the hearts of the people who had been there that day. The customers who had laughed the loudest found themselves humbled, ashamed at how quickly they had judged another human being. The young clerks, once eager to giggle at his expense, now carried his lesson into their daily lives. They learned that wisdom doesn't always wear youth, and success doesn't always wear silk. For them, Mr. Jenkins became a symbol of humility and strength. His presence lingered long after he left the lobby that day, and his story served as a mirror that forced them to look at themselves differently. And what of Mr. Jenkins himself? He continued to visit the bank often, not as a beggar, not as a stranger, but as its rightful owner. Yet, every time he walked in, he carried that same old brown sack on his shoulder. Why? Because the sack had become more than a container of papers. It had become a reminder to the world that appearances deceive, that quiet strength outweighs loud arrogance, and that true wealth doesn't always sparkle. It sometimes rests silently in the hands of those you least expect. So whenever people saw him shuffle in with that sack, they didn't laugh anymore. Instead, they stood straighter, greeted him respectfully, and remembered the day their own arrogance was shattered. And the lesson remained clear for all who heard his story. Never underestimate anyone, because the person you laugh at today might be the very one who owns everything tomorrow. Before we continue this powerful story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, so you never miss stories that will inspire, shock, and change the way you see the world.